Our big story tonight, American veterans risk their lives for this country, enjoying the respect, admiration, and benefits that come with having served.
But there's a number of them who say they've been discarded. They're deported vets now forced to live in their countries of origin, unable to come back to the U.S.
Cronkite News reporter Marcella Baietto traveled down to Mexico to see how these servicemen and women are adjusting to living in a place they refuse to call home.
Every case is different. While some let their green cards expire, others committed crimes as residents. No matter the details, they all have one thing in common. They want to come back to the country they served. We wanted to get answers from immigration and customs officials on their policies when it comes to U.S. veterans. And while the complicated legal process plays out, there is a place in Tijuana that has become a safe haven for them, a place they call home, away from home.
I was a sergeant in the United States Army, deported a year and a half ago.
A year and a half of uncertainty and frustration for Jose Velasco. The Army sergeant has had to completely uproot his life to Tijuana, Mexico, after he was deported out of the United States. Velasco, like many other deported veterans, came legally to the U.S. as a child at just 11 years old in 1964. 7 years later, Velasco was drafted into the Army during the Vietnam War. After the war ended in '75, Velasco says he continued to serve his country.
I was discharged, and they thanked me very much for what I did and so forth, and then I went to the National Guard.
After a few years, Velasco returned to civilian life. At this point, he was a resident of the U.S. He never felt the need to become a citizen because of a false promise, he says, was made by his Army recruiter.
The recruiter made me believe that as soon as my service ended, I was to be an automatic citizen, which was not true. And I found out that the hard way, much later in my life.
It wasn't until Velasco had a run-in with the law in 2012 that he realized becoming a citizen would have saved him from being deported. Velasco arriving in Tijuana in June of last year. His first stop, a place called the Bunker House.
When I got here on practically penniless. If it wasn't for Yoli and the bunker, and Mr. Barajas, I probably would have been asking for money up there outside the church in downtown Tijuana.
The bunker is ran by Hector Barajas, an Army vet who was deported in 2009 but granted a full pardon by California Governor Jerry Brown in 2018. The pardon allowing Barajas to get his U.S. citizenship back. Now, the former paratrooper with the 82nd Airborne Division has made it his new mission to provide legal resources, support, and even housing to other deported servicemen and women.
The Bunker House, located here in this residential Tijuana neighborhood, first opened its doors back in 2013. And Barajas says that since then, they've helped hundreds of U.S. deported veterans get back to the place that they call home.
Thank you for the opportunity to appear before the subcommittee to testify.
Barajas testified in front of the House Judiciary Committee last week, advocating for legislation to bring home these veterans.
I feel the military needs to be accountable, and they need to take their responsibility in making sure that they sit you down and tell you that you can become a citizen.
Arizona lawmakers like Representative Raul Grijalva reintroduced legislation in April attempting to establish a path to citizenship for these servicemen and women. In a statement, Grijalva says, quote, "I introduced the Veteran Deportation Prevention and Reform Act to ensure that America stops this egregious process of deporting veterans and allows those who were deported to come home to their families and the country they love. It is time for Congress to take action and protect immigrant veterans and their families who have sacrificed so much for our nation." In June, the U.S. Government Accountability Office released this report stating Immigration and Customs Enforcement has not done enough to handle, identify, and track deported U.S. veterans. The report cites multiple issues, including not consistently adhering to policies for handling cases of removable veterans, not developing a policy to identify and document all military veterans it encounters, and not maintaining complete electronic data on veterans. That last point is why the exact number of deported veterans isn't fully known, according to Rebecca Gambler, director of the GAO report.
We identified approximately 250 veterans who were placed in removal proceedings or removed from the United States during the time period fiscal year 2013 through 2018. It's important to note this is based on limited information, so there could be additional veterans.
Iracema Coronado started researching deported vets in 1996. She says there are thousands of additional vets not being tracked.
The Hispanic Congressional Caucus, they estimate 3,000 deported veterans throughout the world. I think that there could be an accommodation made.
After the GAO report, ICE has been criticized for its handling of deported veterans. When asked about its policies, they provided Cronkite News with the following statement, reading in part, quote, ICE does not statistically track the number of individuals deported who had previously served in the U.S. military. Applicable law requires ICE to mandatorily detain and process for removal individuals who have been convicted of aggravated felonies as defined under the Immigration and Nationality Act. One of those individuals is Leonel Contreras, who was an 11 Bravo infantryman. He says substance abuse led to a life of crime and eventual deportation.
I think it's kind of cruel that you get deported because you're not a citizen. I think that if you do the time that the judge has already sentenced you to, that should be the end of it. This is like more punishment on our behalf.
Richard Avila served in a helicopter squadron in the Marine Corps. The serviceman was sent back to Mexico in 1996. Years later, he is still struggling.
I still don't feel at home. I'm not at home. I'm an American by culture. I am proud of my heritage, but I'm not a Mexican. I'm an American. And I'd like to go home someday.
Many of these veterans say PTSD, depression, drugs, and alcohol eventually led to their actions and criminal convictions. Veterans like Velasco say all they want is eventually to make it back home to the U.S. But at 75 years old,
I'm one of the oldest people being deported as a veteran.
By the time his legal case is possibly resolved, it could be too late. The next time he's reunited with his family might be at his funeral.
I mean, I'm going to die here, I guess, I'm diabetic. And they said that the only way you're going to get across back to your hometown and back to your country is on a pine box.
The Veteran Deportation Prevention and Reform Act will need the Department of Homeland Security to first create a Military Family Immigration Advisory Committee. It would then make recommendations on whether targeted veterans should be deported. This would also establish a pathway to citizenship for military spouses and their children. In the Broadcast Center, Marcella Baietto, Cronkite News.